In the world we know, Alexandria's greatest treasure was not its lighthouse, though it stood as one of the seven wonders, nor its marble palaces, gleaming white in the Mediterranean sun. It was a different monument altogether, one without columns or towers, built not of stone but of words. The Library of Alexandria, the beating heart of the ancient world's intellect, was less a building than an idea made tangible. The belief that the sum of human knowledge could be gathered in one place and preserved for all time. In our history, that belief was betrayed. Fire, neglect, and the cruelty of conquest saw its scrolls vanish into ash and oblivion. The loss has haunted centuries of scholars, each imagining what secrets might have survived if the papyrus had been spared. But in the world you are about to enter, the fire never came. The library endures, not as a relic, but as a living force that altered the course of history itself. Picture it as it might have been in this alternate strand of time. The library's halls rise in orderly splendor, their colonnades casting cool shadows over floors of polished limestone. The scent of papyrus, beeswax, and ink hangs in the air, mingling with the salt breeze drifting from the great harbor. Within, scribes bend over wooden desks, copying texts in Greek, Demotic, Sanskrit, and classical Chinese. Couriers arrive with crates of scrolls from the far corners of the known world, each one unrolled, cataloged, and copied. The scholars here do not see themselves as custodians of Egypt alone, or of Greece, or of Rome. They are curators of humanity itself. Their ambition is nothing less than the immortality of knowledge. In this reality, Alexandria's rulers, whether Ptolemaic pharaohs or later Roman governors, never allowed the library to be swept aside in the tides of war. They recognized that within those scrolls lay the keys to power, prosperity, and prestige. So they guarded it with the same ferocity they guarded their grain stores and their fleets. Fires were extinguished before they could reach the stacks. Invading generals were persuaded with gold and treaty to leave the library intact. Even in times of civil unrest, the scholars were protected under the law, their work deemed sacred to the city's survival. And so the scrolls endured. What did they hold? Historians of our own world can only guess, but here the guessing ends. In these halls are the complete works of Archimedes, not merely fragments. The lost comedies of Sophocles, the original accounts of Egyptian engineers who raised the pyramids, the star charts of Babylonian astronomers mapped alongside the lunar calculations of Indian mathematicians, Chinese treatises on magnetism, Phoenician records of Atlantic voyages, anatomical studies from physicians in the Indus Valley. Here are the agricultural manuals that could end famine, the navigational methods that could chart the globe, the philosophical treatises that could unite cultures in dialogue rather than conquest. From this surviving core of knowledge, a different history unfolds. Empires rise on the strength of shared science rather than jealously guarded secrets. Diseases are named and understood centuries before they become plagues. Mariners cross oceans guided by maps that are accurate to the degree, and they find not uncharted mystery, but other civilizations ready to meet them as equals. The ancient world's inventors, engineers of steam, hydraulics, and clockwork, are no longer dismissed as curiosities but become the architects of an early industrial age. Progress is no longer a series of fits and starts, sparked and then smothered by ignorance. It is a steady current, flowing through the centuries. Yet this is not a utopia. Knowledge, like fire, can warm or destroy, and the more of it humanity wields, the greater the burden to wield it wisely. In this timeline, wars are fought not only over territory and gold, but over control of the library's treasures. There are moments when the pursuit of invention outpaces the ability to foresee its consequences. Still, the arc of history bends toward connection rather than isolation, toward a world that remembers more than it forgets. To walk into this alternate Alexandria is to feel the hum of possibility under your skin. The marble walls do not echo with lament for what has been lost. They vibrate with the anticipation of what might yet be discovered. In our own world, the Library of Alexandria is a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of universities. But here, in this telling, it is alive, its scrolls intact, its scribes at work, its doors open to all who seek the wisdom of the ages. And from this survival, a new story begins, one in which the library's light is never extinguished and the path of civilization is forever changed. In the heart of the Mediterranean, where the waters shimmer like sheets of hammered bronze beneath the sun, Alexandria rises, a city conceived as a statement to the world that power need not rest solely in the sword or the plow. Founded by Alexander the Great and nurtured under the Ptolemies, it stands not just as a port of trade, but as the axis of a new intellectual order. From the Pharos Lighthouse, tallest structure on Earth, a beam of light sweeps across the sea, guiding merchant galleys and warships alike into the great harbor. Beyond the docks, a web of marble avenues and bustling markets stretches inland, but the true treasure lies farther still, behind high walls and colonnaded courtyards, the library and the adjoining Mouseion, the Temple of the Muses. In this alternate history, the library's survival has transformed Alexandria into more than an Egyptian city with a Greek name. It has become the physical embodiment of human memory. The complex sprawls across multiple wings, each devoted to a different realm of knowledge: mathematics, medicine, natural philosophy, poetry, navigation, agriculture, engineering. Scrolls are stacked in cedar chests and shelved in niches that rise to the ceilings. The air is thick with the faint musk of papyrus fibers, warmed by the soft glow of oil lamps. To the casual visitor, it might feel like a place of quiet contemplation. To those who understand its purpose, it is the most powerful institution on Earth. Here, knowledge is not stored passively. It is cultivated, refined, and expanded. The library operates on a relentless principle. Every ship that enters the great harbor is inspected, and any scrolls or manuscripts on board are brought here to be copied before being returned to their owners. This decree, known in our world only through fragmented historical accounts, is fully enforced in this reality. The result is a constant inflow of texts from across the known world. Treatises from Carthaginian traders, astronomical charts from Babylon, Buddhist sutras carried by envoys from India, medical compendiums from the courts of China. The scribes, numbering in the hundreds, work day and night to reproduce these documents with meticulous care, annotating where needed, and storing the originals in climate-controlled chambers. The Mouseion functions as the library's living mind. It is a community of resident scholars, mathematicians, poets, doctors, and astronomers, all supported at state expense. They dine together, debate together, and teach apprentices from across the Mediterranean and beyond. In our own history, such communities have often been vulnerable to political whims. Here, their position is secured by law and by the recognition that the library's prestige is the lifeblood of Alexandria's influence. For the rulers, it is a tool of soft power. To possess the world's knowledge is to dictate the terms of the future. The city itself reflects the synthesis the library promotes. Streets are lit by oil lamps hung from wrought bronze poles, their design borrowed from the workshops of Rhodes. Aqueducts, drawing on both Egyptian irrigation wisdom and Roman engineering, carry fresh water to public fountains. Shipyards produce vessels whose hull shapes combine Phoenician speed with Greek stability. Markets sell spices from the east alongside linen from the Nile Delta, tin from Britain, and amber from the Baltic. This is not mere commerce. It is the visible manifestation of a cultural ecosystem that thrives because the library has made Alexandria the common ground for ideas. At night, when the harbor falls quiet, the library does not sleep. In its observatories, astronomers track the movement of planets, refining calculations inherited from Babylonian skywatchers and comparing them with Indian sidereal tables. In the botanical gardens, herbalists experiment with plant grafting, cross-referencing Egyptian agricultural manuals with Chinese records of tea cultivation. In the carpentry workshops, designs for water-lifting devices are tested, not to impress the court, but to improve irrigation across the Nile Valley and beyond. Every new insight is documented, copied, and disseminated through a network of scribes and couriers to allied cities and friendly courts. The presence of this preserved repository has already begun to shape geopolitics. Rome, still a rising power in this early phase of the alternate timeline, maintains cordial relations with Alexandria not solely because of grain shipments, but because of access to the library's archives. Greek city-states, long past their imperial zenith, find a new role as scholarly partners, sending their brightest minds to work alongside Egyptian astronomers and Persian mathematicians. Even distant kingdoms recognize that the cost of alienating Alexandria is measured not just in trade sanctions, but in the loss of access to innovations that can decide the fate of empires. But the library's survival does not mean its treasures are freely given to all. The Ptolemaic court, and later Roman governors, regulate what is shared, often releasing knowledge selectively to maintain political leverage. A navigational breakthrough might be offered to an ally, withheld from a rival. A new method of metal refinement might be demonstrated in the shipyards of a loyal province, but kept secret from the workshops of a potential adversary. This strategic curation ensures that Alexandria remains indispensable, but it also plants the seeds for future conflicts over who has the right to know. Yet within the city's walls, the scholars themselves see a larger mission. They believe the library is not merely a tool of statecraft, but a covenant with the future. They speak quietly, in shaded colonnades, of a world where famine is rare because agricultural science is universal, where navigation charts link continents in peaceful exchange, where medicine prevents more deaths than war causes. They understand that the road to such a future is long, and that the politics of their patrons may sometimes run counter to the ideals of open knowledge. Still, they persist, recording, copying, refining, trusting that preservation is itself a form of resistance against the erasures of time. For now, Alexandria thrives as a beacon. From the Pharos, its light reaches ships approaching from every horizon. From the library, its influence radiates across cultures and centuries. The city is not yet the utopia some of its scholars imagine, but it is the seedbed of a world in which the past is never truly lost, and the future is shaped by the conscious choice to remember. If Alexandria is the body of this alternate world's intellectual empire, then the librarians, scribes, translators, and scholars are its lifeblood, pulsing through corridors lined with scrolls, binding together centuries of human experience with ink, wax, and memory. They are not merely keepers of books. They are the custodians of civilization's continuity. Without them, the grand colonnades and marble reading halls would be hollow shells, impressive in form but empty of meaning. The city's rulers understand this truth, which is why the men and women of the Library of Alexandria are afforded protections and privileges rare in the ancient world. At the top stands the chief librarian, a position equal in status to the high priests of the temples or the most trusted generals of the army. In this timeline, the position is more than ceremonial. It carries authority over the acquisition, preservation, and controlled release of the library's contents. The current holder of the post, a Greek-born scholar named Theon of Chalcis, commands a staff of hundreds. Under his leadership, the library operates with the precision of a well-drilled fleet. New acquisitions are logged immediately, with scribes working in pairs, one to dictate from the source, the other to write, ensuring both speed and accuracy. Any work entering Alexandria's harbor, whether purchased, gifted, or temporarily seized for copying, is examined for authenticity. Fraudulent or corrupted texts are marked, corrected, and returned to circulation with clear annotations, preventing errors from propagating through the scholarly network. The scribes themselves are a diverse community. Many are Egyptians trained in the meticulous art of papyrus preparation and ink mixing. Others are Greek copyists skilled in elegant scripts. Still others are translators fluent in Aramaic, Persian, Sanskrit, or Latin. In the scriptorium, a vast, sunlit hall where rows of desks stretch beneath high ceilings. These men and women work with an intensity born not from coercion, but from a deep sense of purpose. They know they are part of a chain stretching backward into antiquity and forward into futures they can scarcely imagine. To err is to fracture that chain. To preserve a text flawlessly is to strengthen it for generations yet unborn. Specialized divisions handle the most delicate works. The medical archives are tended by physicians who can interpret the anatomical diagrams of Hippocrates alongside herbal treatises from India and surgical notes from Chinese healers. The astronomical wing is staffed by mathematicians capable of recalculating Babylonian planetary tables in light of Greek geometric theories. Here, Astronomy is not the pastime of philosophers, but a state-supported science. Its predictions influencing navigation, agriculture, and even political calendars. The engineering section houses models, small-scale reconstructions of devices described in the texts, crafted by artisans to test the feasibility of ancient designs. In this way, knowledge is not merely read but applied, allowing theoretical breakthroughs to become tangible tools. Security is as much intellectual as physical. The library's catalogs are themselves guarded works, organized not only by subject but by level of clearance. Some treatises, particularly those on advanced metallurgy, siegecraft, or long-distance navigation, are stored in restricted vaults, accessible only to scholars with direct authorization from the chief librarian and, in some cases, the ruler of Alexandria. This system ensures that while the city gains the benefits of innovation, it does not inadvertently arm its enemies with the same tools. Dissent exists among the scholars about this selective access. Many argue that knowledge hoarded is knowledge diminished. Yet most recognize the pragmatic necessity of such measures in a world where empires rise and fall by the edge of a blade or the turn of a rudder. Beyond the walls of the library, the guardians of knowledge maintain an invisible web. Trusted couriers carry copies of important works to allied repositories in Pergamon, Antioch, and Rhodes, ensuring that no single disaster can wipe out an entire branch of study. These partner collections, while smaller, mirror the cataloging systems of Alexandria, allowing a degree of standardization that makes scholarly exchange faster and more reliable. In return, these cities send back their own unique holdings, whether it be Celtic medicinal lore from the fringes of Gaul or agricultural calendars from the African interior. The network functions much like the arteries and veins of a living body, circulating information as nutrients to the broader organism of civilization. Preservation is a constant battle against time and the elements. Papyrus, even under ideal conditions, is vulnerable to humidity, insects, and decay. In this timeline, the library's conservators, borrowing techniques from multiple cultures, have developed improved storage vessels, sealing scrolls in clay-lined cases to regulate temperature and moisture. They experiment with parchment and early forms of treated leather for particularly valuable works, trading the elegance of papyrus for durability. Some even explore the use of thin metal sheets for inscriptions, an expensive but nearly indestructible medium. The fact that such efforts are funded and encouraged by the state is itself a testament to the recognition of knowledge as an asset as valuable as gold. Yet the Guardian's mission is not purely material. They also defend against the erosion of meaning. Language shifts over centuries, idioms fade, cultural references lose their context. To preserve the words is not enough. They must also preserve the understanding. This is the work of the commentators, scholars who annotate ancient texts with explanations, cross-references, and historical framing. Their marginalia become bridges across time, allowing a mathematician in the year 200 to understand a Babylonian equation from 1,000 years earlier, or a doctor to replicate an Indian surgical technique with full awareness of its risks and prerequisites. Some of the Guardians work in shadow, their efforts unacknowledged by official records. These are the ones who smuggle copies of restricted works to sympathetic colleagues abroad, or who maintain hidden duplicates of politically sensitive texts in case they are ever ordered destroyed. They act not out of defiance, but from a conviction that the library's mission, to safeguard human knowledge, must transcend the changing agendas of rulers. In this alternate history, such acts are less frequent than in our own world, for the rulers of Alexandria are unusually protective of the library. Still, the Guardians know that power is fickle, and that even the most enlightened patron can be replaced by one who sees knowledge as a threat. Through their vigilance, the library becomes more than a repository. It is a living organism, its health maintained by countless hands and minds. It is also, in its own quiet way, a fortress, not one defended by battlements or garrisons, but by an unbroken chain of memory and skill. The scrolls could burn, yes, but as long as even one guardian lives, their contents could be restored. This redundancy, planned and cultivated over centuries, is the true reason the Library of Alexandria still stands in this alternate world. It survives not because it is indestructible, but because its protectors have ensured that destruction would never mean the end. The phrase would not exist for millennia, but in this alternate history, the essence of what we might call an internet is already alive in the ancient world, not in glowing screens and fiber optic cables, but in the ceaseless movement of scrolls, couriers, and correspondence radiating from Alexandria to the farthest known corners of the earth. The library is no longer just a physical location. It is the beating heart of a sprawling intellectual network, a web of human minds linked by ink and papyrus, where information travels with astonishing speed for its age. This transformation began as a practical necessity. Even in a city as well defended as Alexandria, the guardians of knowledge understood that any single location, no matter how mighty, was vulnerable to catastrophe. A fire, a flood, a change in political climate could imperil centuries of collected wisdom. To ensure its survival, the chief librarians established a deliberate policy of duplication and distribution. Every text deemed vital was copied not once, but multiple times, with one version retained in Alexandria, others dispatched to mirror libraries in allied cities such as Pergamon, Antioch, Carthage, and Massalia. These repositories were not haphazard collections. They followed Alexandria's own cataloging system, ensuring that a scholar in Gaul could request a text using the same reference code as a scholar in Egypt. The infrastructure supporting this network was as impressive as any Roman road. Couriers moved with military efficiency, protected by diplomatic agreements that granted them safe passage even through rival territories. Some traveled overland on swift horses. Others took to the sea, sailing between ports with bundles of scrolls sealed in wax-lined chests to protect against moisture. At every transfer point, local scribes verified the integrity of the documents, made additional copies, and relayed them onward. Though the process was slow by modern standards, it represented a quantum leap over the fragmentary and localized exchange of ideas that characterized our actual ancient past. More than simply preserving works, the network fostered an unprecedented flow of new information back to Alexandria. Farmers in Iberia sent reports of improved plowing techniques. Navigators from the Red Sea described unfamiliar constellations visible in the southern hemisphere. Indian metallurgists shared methods for producing high-carbon steel. Healers from sub-Saharan Africa documented medicinal plants unknown to Mediterranean apothecaries. Each of these contributions entered the library's catalogs, cross-referenced with related works, and, when deemed significant, circulated outward again in updated editions. In this way, the network did not merely store knowledge. It synthesized and amplified it, creating feedback loops of discovery. Language, a perpetual barrier in the ancient world, became less of an obstacle. Alexandria's translation bureaus grew into vast enterprises employing polyglot scholars who worked in teams to render texts into Greek, Latin, Egyptian Demotic, and occasionally into languages far beyond the Mediterranean sphere. Multilingual glossaries circulated with the scrolls, allowing readers to grasp core concepts even if they lacked fluency in the original tongue. In time, these glossaries evolved into standardized scientific vocabularies, rudimentary but remarkably effective tools for ensuring that a medical term or navigational measurement meant the same in Carthage as it did in Bactria. The mouse ion played a central role in coordinating this proto-digital network. Scholars there acted as routers, receiving queries from distant colleagues and directing them to the appropriate specialist. A request from a Celtic chieftain for better iron smelting techniques might pass through the hands of a metallurgist who, in turn, sent back not only a detailed description but diagrams and suggestions for local adaptation. These exchanges were often accompanied by questions of their own, prompting further dialogue. Over time, certain scholars became known as nodes, trusted points of contact whose endorsements could validate the authenticity and usefulness of a text. Reputation thus became a kind of intellectual currency, determining which voices carried weight across the network. The political ramifications were profound. Rulers who maintained strong ties with Alexandria gained not just prestige, but a tangible advantage: earlier access to innovations in agriculture, engineering, or medicine. A new irrigation method developed in the Nile Delta could, within a few seasons, transform harvests in the Levant. A breakthrough in ship design tested in the Great Harbor might be adopted by Allied navies before potential adversaries even heard of it. Knowledge became a form of soft power, enabling Alexandria and its partners to shape the balance of the ancient world without always resorting to military force. Of course, the system had its vulnerabilities. Couriers could be waylaid, copies intercepted, or altered. Some rulers, realizing the value of exclusive access, sought to block certain texts from leaving their borders, creating information bottlenecks. Intellectual espionage emerged as a recognized practice. Agents posing as scholars infiltrated partner libraries to copy restricted works or to introduce subtle errors into key texts, sowing confusion in rival states. Yet these challenges only reinforced the need for redundancy. If one copy was lost or corrupted, another might still arrive intact from a different route. The cultural effects of the network were equally transformative. Artistic styles began to blend as designs from far-flung lands inspired local craftspeople. Poets incorporated metaphors from foreign myths. Architects combined engineering techniques from multiple traditions to create hybrid structures. Over time, a sense of shared intellectual heritage emerged among the educated elite, who saw themselves not merely as subjects of individual kingdoms, but as participants in a broader civilizational project. Perhaps the most revolutionary outcome was the acceleration of cumulative knowledge. In our history, great ideas often had to be rediscovered by separate cultures centuries apart, each laboring in isolation. Here, a breakthrough in one corner of the known world could be disseminated within a single generation, refined by many hands, and reissued in improved form. Progress no longer depended on a fragile chain of transmission across the ages. It could be nurtured in real time. For those within the library's orbit, the analogy they favored was not of a net or a web, but of a river, one whose waters carried the lifeblood of civilization. Alexandria was the spring, its scrolls the headwaters, but the currents reached far beyond the city's shores, branching into countless tributaries and returning enriched with the knowledge of distant lands. And as long as the river flowed, they believed, the garden of human possibility would never wither. In the timeline where the Library of Alexandria survives, history does not inch forward in hesitant steps, it surges. The constant flow of knowledge through Alexandria's network, combined with the city's deliberate policy of dissemination, transforms the ancient world into a crucible of invention. Technologies that, in our reality, emerged sporadically and were often lost to the fog of time instead take root and flourish, each building upon the last in a cascade of advancement. The result is a world where the pace of innovation rivals anything the modern age has seen, though shaped by the materials, aesthetics, and social structures of antiquity. At the heart of this transformation is the library's engineering division, a sprawling complex adjacent to the Mouse Ion. In long workshops flooded with light from open courtyards, artisans and scholars work side by side. Here, the boundary between theory and practice dissolves. A Greek mathematician may spend the morning calculating gear ratios for a complex mechanism, then hand his parchment to an Egyptian bronze worker who, by afternoon, is casting the necessary cogs. Phoenician carpenters shape ship hulls according to the latest naval treatises, while Indian metallurgists temper steel blades based on formulas recorded centuries earlier. Each project is cataloged and, if successful, replicated for dispatch to allied states, ensuring that breakthroughs are not confined to a single place or lifetime. Some of these engines of innovation are literal. Hero of Alexandria, an engineer who, in our timeline, invented steam-powered devices as novelties, finds in this world an audience eager to refine and apply his creations. The Eolipile, a steam-driven rotary engine, is no longer a curiosity but the prototype for industrial machinery. Paired with water pumps described in ancient Egyptian and Persian texts, it becomes a tool for irrigation on a scale once unimaginable, allowing arid lands to be cultivated year-round. Over time, steam technology is adapted to drive sawmills, grain grinders, and even experimental vehicles, carts with rotary mechanisms capable of short-distance movement without animal labor. Navigation undergoes a similar leap. The combination of Phoenician seamanship, Indian oceanic charts, and Chinese observations of the magnetic lodestone produces an early form of the compass centuries ahead of schedule. Paired with more accurate star maps from Babylonian and Greek astronomers, it enables mariners to venture confidently into open seas far beyond the sight of land. Trade routes expand not only across the Mediterranean but deep into the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, knitting together cultures that, in our history, would not meet for centuries. Agriculture benefits from a fusion of knowledge equally transformative. From the Indus Valley comes advanced crop rotation, from Egypt, precision irrigation, from Rome, the heavy plow, from China, the wheelbarrow and seed drill. Combined, these innovations drive agricultural surpluses that free a greater portion of the population from subsistence farming, swelling the ranks of artisans, soldiers, and, crucially, scholars. The demographic shift creates a feedback loop. More specialists lead to more discoveries, which in turn support more innovation. Medicine, too, strides forward. In this reality, the works of Hippocrates, Galen, and Sushruta are not only preserved but tested against one another. Egyptian surgical techniques merge with Indian knowledge of antiseptics. Chinese herbal remedies are compared with African botanical studies. The result is a medical canon that blends empirical observation with practical experimentation. Diseases that in our timeline devastated populations. Smallpox, plague, malaria are identified earlier, their symptoms cataloged and treatments standardized across regions. While the world is far from eradicating these illnesses, survival rates climb, and public health measures, such as quarantine protocols and sanitation engineering, are implemented centuries ahead of our historical record. The intellectual environment that fosters these leaps is as important as the inventions themselves. Alexandria's rulers, understanding the power such innovations grant, invest heavily in education. Literacy spreads beyond the elite, particularly in urban centers linked to the library's network. Guilds of artisans and engineers emerge, operating under charters that allow them to collaborate across city and national boundaries. In some regions, these guilds hold as much influence as traditional priesthoods or noble houses, their authority rooted not in divine sanction, but in their ability to solve practical problems. Art and technology intertwine. Monumental architecture draws on engineering principles from multiple traditions, resulting in structures of breathtaking scale and complexity. Suspension bridges in the Alps, domed temples in the deserts of Arabia, aqueducts stretching across North Africa into Iberia. Decorative arts adopt new materials, stained glass from an early mastery of colored silicates, intricate bronze inlays shaped with tools of unprecedented precision. These works serve as visible proof that the age is not merely practical, but also aspirational, seeking beauty alongside utility. Yet the engines of innovation also produce tension. The very speed of change unsettles traditional power structures. Rural communities sometimes resist new farming techniques that disrupt seasonal rhythms. Established religious authorities bristle at mechanical devices that seem to diminish the role of divine intervention in daily life. Some rulers fear that widespread literacy and the free exchange of ideas will erode their control, prompting efforts to regulate or monopolize certain branches of knowledge. In a few cases, innovations are deliberately suppressed, their dissemination halted by decree. But the network, resilient and redundant, makes total suppression difficult. Once a useful idea enters circulation, it tends to reappear elsewhere, reborn in another workshop, another city, another mind. Over the centuries, this sustained acceleration sets the ancient world on a trajectory toward an early industrial age. The inventions remain bound by the materials and aesthetics of antiquity. Steam engines housed in marble colonnades, gearworks adorned with gold leaf, surgical tools stored in carved ivory cases. But their impact is unmistakable. Cities grow denser and more interconnected. Economies shift from seasonal cycles to continuous production. Warfare changes as new metallurgy and engineering produce weapons and defenses of unprecedented sophistication. The Library of Alexandria remains at the center of it all, not as a passive vault of ancient wisdom, but as an active generator of the future. Every new scroll added to its shelves is not merely an artifact, but a seed, capable of sprouting in distant soil and bearing fruit in forms its original author might never have imagined. In this timeline, the ancient world hums with the energy of possibility, its engines of innovation powered not by chance, but by a deliberate, organized, and relentless commitment to the preservation and expansion of human knowledge. In the world where the Library of Alexandria never fell, the map of the ancient world does not remain the patchwork of familiar coastlines and vague inland guesses that we know from our history. Instead, it becomes a living, evolving tapestry, redrawn with each voyage, each caravan, each scroll carried into the library's colonnaded halls. Geography, once a discipline of educated speculation, transforms into an exact science, driven by the fusion of cartographic traditions from across the known world. In this alternate timeline, the very concept of the world grows faster, broader, and more precise than the ancients of our reality could have ever imagined. The change begins in Alexandria's map rooms, vast chambers lined not with books, but with painted parchment and papyrus rolls, suspended on racks or laid flat on polished cedar tables. The earliest maps in the collection are the products of Egyptian surveyors, Greek philosophers, and Babylonian astronomers. Alone, each is incomplete. Egyptian charts excel in riverine detail but falter at oceanic scope. Greek maps capture conceptual symmetry but lack measured precision. Babylonian star charts plot celestial navigation but tell little of landforms. In our timeline, such sources were rarely reconciled. Here, they are layered, compared, corrected, and combined into a single, expanding master atlas. Into this evolving picture come contributions from beyond the Mediterranean. Indian traders arriving with spices and cotton bring palm leaf manuscripts charting the Malabar coast, the Bay of Bengal, and distant islands in the Malay archipelago. Chinese envoys, following diplomatic missions through Central Asia, contribute silk maps showing river systems and mountain passes of lands far east of the Caspian. Carthaginian merchants, long masters of the Atlantic coastlines of Africa and Iberia, share guarded knowledge of voyages beyond the Pillars of Hercules, hinting at territories farther south than the equator. Each edition is meticulously verified, then integrated into the library's master atlas by teams of geographers working in the Mouse-Ion. Verification becomes an art as much as a science. Alexandria develops what could be called the first standardized survey methods. Distances measured in fixed stadia, bearings confirmed by portable gnomons and magnetic lodestones, coastlines sketched from triangulated points aboard ships. Couriers return not only with trade goods, but with detailed logs of waypoints, wind patterns, and tidal cycles. Navigators are trained to keep daily records, later deposited in regional repositories and transmitted to Alexandria for inclusion in updated editions of the atlas. The result is an ever more accurate image of the world, one that expands not in hazy conjecture, but in crisp, measured lines. The consequences for trade are staggering. With dependable charts, merchant fleets venture beyond the seasonal coasting patterns of the past, sailing open water with confidence. The Red Sea and Persian Gulf become superhighways for goods and knowledge moving between Egypt, India, and East Africa. The Mediterranean, already a bustling commercial hub, is reoriented as one node in a truly global network of exchange. Overland, the map's accuracy transforms caravan routes. Knowing the precise locations of wells, passes, and fertile oases allows caravans to shorten journeys across deserts by weeks, reducing losses and making long-distance commerce safer and more profitable. But it is the opening of entirely new horizons that most visibly reshapes this world. By the middle of the 2nd century BCE in this timeline, expeditions financed jointly by Alexandria and allied states reach the Canary Islands and venture along the West African coast, eventually crossing the Atlantic to find lush lands and unfamiliar peoples. Unlike the accidental encounters of our history, these voyages are deliberate, guided by navigational theory refined in the library's halls. Early contacts are tentative, often limited to exchange of goods and knowledge rather than conquest. The network of mirror libraries expands to these new territories, ensuring that the flow of information is reciprocal. Equally transformative is the mapping of the northern seas. Norse traders, centuries ahead of their historical emergence, are drawn into contact through intermediaries in Britannia and the Baltic. Their knowledge of the North Atlantic, of Iceland, Greenland, and beyond, is added to the atlas, bringing even the icy reaches of the far north into the cartographic fold. By cross-referencing Norse records with Celtic and Mediterranean data, Alexandria's geographers produce routes that connect the northern and southern extremes of the known world. As the maps grow more accurate, so too does the ambition of explorers. The concept of a world circumnavigation emerges, not as a wild philosophical musing, but as a planned, achievable project. Using the library's combined data on currents, winds, and coastlines, a multi-state expedition is launched in the 1st century CE in this alternate history. The journey takes years, but it returns with proof that the seas are a single, interconnected system. This revelation transforms not only navigation but worldview. No longer is the Earth a collection of isolated cultural spheres, but a single, vast stage upon which all civilizations act. Culturally, the new map of the world reshapes identity. Peoples who once thought of themselves as dwelling at the center of all things now understand themselves as part of a wider human fabric. Languages, currencies, and measurement systems begin to standardize, not universally, but enough to facilitate smoother exchange across immense distances. Artistic motifs from distant lands appear in urban marketplaces. Culinary traditions blend as spices and grains cross oceans. Religious ideas travel alongside goods, sometimes merging into hybrid faiths that reflect the interconnectedness of the age. Politically, the atlas becomes as potent a weapon as any spear or siege engine. Rulers with access to the latest maps can project power into distant territories, launch surprise raids along uncharted routes, or secure alliances with far-off states. Conversely, the shared knowledge of geography makes isolationism increasingly untenable. A city cannot claim ignorance of the world beyond its walls when its contours are rendered in ink and widely circulated. Control over the flow of cartographic data becomes a strategic concern, and in some cases, certain high-precision maps are treated as state secrets. Still, the redundancy of the library's network makes hoarding difficult. Once a coastline is charted, it tends to appear on maps from Carthage to Chang'an within a generation. By the close of antiquity in this alternate history, the image of the Earth recorded in Alexandria's map rooms is astonishingly complete. From the icy fjords of the far north to the coral atolls of the Pacific, from the high Andes to the savannas of southern Africa, the outlines of continents and seas are set down with remarkable fidelity. To step into the library and unfurl one of these great charts is to see not only the breadth of human discovery, but the promise of what comes next. The map is no longer just a record of where humanity has been. It is an invitation to where it might go. In our history, language has always been both bridge and barrier, a means of exchange and a source of separation. Empires have risen and fallen in part on their ability to communicate across cultures, and yet misunderstandings have fueled conflict as often as they have fostered cooperation. But in the alternate world where the Library of Alexandria endures, the story is different. The library, guided by a deliberate policy of translation and standardization, becomes the ancient world's most ambitious linguistic unifier. Instead of a patchwork of mutually unintelligible tongues that fragment knowledge, the ancient world grows into a polyglot civilization where ideas flow as freely as goods along trade routes. The foundations of this revolution are laid early. The Ptolemies, patrons of the library, recognize that its vast stores of knowledge will be useless if they cannot be read and understood by those who need them. Thus begins an unprecedented translation program. Teams of linguists, Greek philosophers, Egyptian scribes, Jewish scholars from Jerusalem, Indian Brahmins, Chinese envoys, and Phoenician traders work together in the library's translation halls, their tables laden with papyrus scrolls, parchment codices, and bamboo slips. Using a combination of direct translation and intermediary languages, they begin converting the library's holdings into a set of standardized tongues: Greek for much of the Mediterranean, a refined form of Egyptian Demotic for North Africa, Sanskrit for the Indian subcontinent, and Classical Chinese for the Far East. Over time, A common lexicon emerges, an early ancestor of what might be called a world language, a hybrid designed for scholarly and diplomatic exchange. The translation process is meticulous. No scroll is copied without annotation. No foreign term is left without explanation. When a concept has no direct equivalent in the receiving language, it is adopted whole, its foreignness preserved as a reminder of its origins. These borrowed words, over time, become part of the common vocabulary of scholars, traders, and diplomats. A Roman merchant in Alexandria may speak Greek, peppered with Egyptian agricultural terms and Sanskrit mathematical expressions, while a Babylonian astronomer can read Chinese star maps annotated in Greek numerals. This linguistic fluidity accelerates the spread of technical knowledge. Education becomes the next pillar of this linguistic bridge building. The library sponsors schools not only in Alexandria, but in major port cities and caravan hubs across its network. Instructors trained in the library's methods teach children a dual curriculum, the language of their birth region and one of the standardized scholarly tongues. In bustling Alexandria itself, it is not uncommon to hear children switching fluidly between 3 or 4 languages before they reach adulthood. Literacy rates climb rapidly, especially among urban populations. Where our history saw literacy restricted to elites, here it becomes a hallmark of civic participation. This multilingual education system fosters not only intellectual exchange, but also cultural empathy. A Carthaginian child studying Sanskrit medical texts learns to see disease as Indian physicians do. A Greek student of Chinese philosophy begins to grasp the Taoist understanding of nature's balance. An Egyptian engineer reading Babylonian mathematics adopts new techniques for calculating volume and force. These encounters do more than expand knowledge. They chip away at the cultural prejudices that often arise from ignorance. The infrastructure supporting this linguistic revolution is as important as the teaching itself. The library develops a codified writing system for its world language that blends Greek phonetics, Egyptian determinatives, and Chinese logographs. This hybrid script, though complex, proves adaptable to a wide range of sounds and meanings. To ensure its uniformity, the library issues standardized grammar manuals and dictionaries, updated periodically and distributed to all satellite repositories. In an age without printing presses, this is an enormous logistical feat, relying on a core of professional scribes who work in shifts to copy each new edition. As trade expands, so does the practical use of this shared language. Merchant contracts, maritime charts, legal decrees, and scientific treatises begin appearing in dual-column formats, the local tongue alongside the library's standardized language. Over time, the latter becomes a mark of authenticity and authority. A navigational map without its library-issued bilingual annotations is considered suspect. A medical text lacking the standardized glossary is viewed as incomplete. Religion, too, is transformed by this linguistic unification. Sacred texts are translated more quickly and more widely than in our history, enabling cross-cultural theological debates. While this sometimes leads to tension, ancient faiths being protective of their doctrines, it also sparks syncretic movements, where ideas from multiple traditions merge into new forms of worship. A philosopher-priest in Alexandria might cite Confucius alongside Plato and the Vedas in the same sermon, creating a spiritual discourse that crosses continents. The diplomatic benefits are profound. Treaties, once vulnerable to mistranslation, are now negotiated in the shared scholarly tongue, reducing misunderstandings that might otherwise lead to war. Envoys can be trained in Alexandria's language academies before being dispatched abroad, ensuring they can communicate directly with foreign courts without relying on intermediaries whose loyalties might be divided. Over time, this reduces the frequency of conflicts sparked by misinterpretation. Yet this linguistic and educational revolution is not without its critics. Some regional powers fear the erosion of their cultural identities, suspecting that the library's world language is a vehicle for Alexandrian influence. In more insular societies, elders resist the introduction of foreign words into sacred or poetic forms. There are even occasional rebellions in which local leaders expel library-trained teachers, insisting on a return to linguistic purity. But the economic and intellectual advantages of the shared language often outweigh such resistance. Cities that embrace the library's methods prosper. Those that reject them find themselves isolated in an increasingly interconnected world. By the early centuries CE, in this alternate history, a traveler could journey from the shores of Iberia to the courts of China carrying only a modest phrasebook in the shared tongue and be understood well enough to trade, negotiate, or study. A physician from Alexandria could read case studies recorded in the Malay archipelago. An astronomer from Chang'an could annotate a Greek treatise on planetary motion. The library's vision of a linguistically connected humanity has begun to take tangible shape. In the grand halls of the Mausoleum, scholars look upon their multilingual archives with a sense of destiny. To them, the bridging of language is more than convenience. It is the foundation for a unified intellectual tradition that spans the known world. Words, after all, are the vessels of thought, and in this reality, they sail across seas and deserts with the same ease as the merchant ships that carry silk, grain, and gold. The Library of Alexandria, through its patient work of translation and teaching, has built not only a map of the world's lands, but also a map of the world's minds, linking them with threads of ink and parchment. In our own history, medicine has often been a fragile thread, advanced in one era, frayed or lost in the next. Empires rose with physicians versed in anatomy and herbal lore, only for that knowledge to vanish in war, neglect, or the turning of cultural tides. But in the alternate world where the Library of Alexandria survives, that thread is never broken. It grows stronger with each passing century, woven from the medical traditions of every corner of the known world into a single, unbroken tapestry of healing. From its earliest years, the library holds medicine as one of its most prized disciplines. The founding Ptolemies, keenly aware of Egypt's ancient traditions in healing, dedicate entire wings to the storage of medical papyri. Works detailing surgical techniques, pharmacological recipes, and the spiritual rituals that accompany healing in the Nile Valley. These scrolls are set alongside the Hippocratic corpus of Greece, Babylonian omen-based diagnoses, Indian Ayurvedic treatises, Chinese Huangdi Neijing medical classics, and the herbal manuals of the African Sahel. Rather than existing in isolation, these traditions are brought into dialogue within the library's scholarly halls. In this world, the library's translation program ensures that the insights of one culture do not languish unread in the language of another. Egyptian records of trepanning and bone setting are studied by Greek physicians, who compare them to Indian surgical texts describing cataract removal and complex wound stitching. Chinese pulse diagnosis is tested alongside Babylonian theories of humors and Indian tridosha principles, leading to a more nuanced understanding of illness. When one school of thought lacks an explanation for a symptom, another may provide the missing piece. The library becomes not merely an archive, but a crucible for medical synthesis. This cross-cultural integration yields advances far ahead of their time. In our reality, germ theory would not be articulated until the 19th century CE, but in this alternate history, the combined observations of Indian, Chinese, and North African healers, preserved, compared, and refined in Alexandria, point toward the existence of invisible agents of disease centuries earlier. The practice of boiling water before consumption, of cleaning surgical tools with heated metal, and of isolating the sick in designated wards emerges not as scattered folk wisdom, but as standardized protocol taught in library-sponsored medical academies. Mortality rates from infectious disease begin to drop in urban centers that adopt these methods. The pharmacopoeia of this world is equally advanced. Indian traders bring with them spices and herbs, turmeric, cinnamon, and neem, whose antimicrobial properties are documented in Ayurvedic literature. Chinese envoys contribute knowledge of ginseng, rhubarb, and ephedra. African healers share the uses of kola nut, hibiscus, and baobab fruit. These remedies are cataloged in the library's Great Herbarium Hall, where dried specimens hang from rafters and drawers are filled with seeds, resins, and powders from across the continents. Physicians are trained not only in identification, but in dosage, preparation, and potential interactions between substances, concepts far ahead of the largely empirical methods of our ancient past. Surgery, too, benefits from this confluence. Greek advances in anatomical dissection, once limited by cultural taboos, are expanded upon using Egyptian embalming knowledge and Indian surgical precision. Bronze scalpels are replaced by steel instruments imported from India and refined by Mediterranean smiths. Techniques for setting bones, draining abscesses, and excising tumors are documented and taught with exacting detail, including the post-operative care needed to prevent infection. Alexandria's medical schools maintain cadaveric studies, not for ritual but for science, ensuring that physicians understand the body's structures before attempting repairs. Public health infrastructure emerges centuries earlier than in our world. Cities within the library's sphere of influence begin to design aqueducts and sewer systems not only for convenience, but as deliberate tools for disease prevention. Waste disposal is regulated. Water supplies are monitored for contamination. Urban planning incorporates wide roads and open spaces to reduce the spread of illness in crowded quarters. These measures are informed by Egyptian engineering, Roman construction expertise, and Chinese principles of feng shui adapted for sanitation. The impact of these advances extends beyond the realm of physical health. The survival of infants rises as midwives, trained in a fusion of Egyptian birthing stools, Indian massage techniques, and herbal remedies from Africa, reduce mortality in childbirth. Life expectancy grows as chronic conditions like arthritis or cataracts are treated rather than endured. With healthier populations, productivity increases, and the pool of individuals able to contribute to intellectual and artistic life expands dramatically. The flowering of philosophy, literature, and science in this world is fueled, in part, by the fact that more people live long enough to master such pursuits. Yet this alternate history is not without challenges. The very act of sharing medical knowledge across cultures raises ethical and political debates. Some rulers seek to monopolize advanced treatments for their own courts, seeing medicine as a tool of power rather than a universal good. Others fear that foreign remedies might carry hidden dangers, leading to occasional backlash against library medicine. Religious authorities in certain regions object to anatomical dissection or the mixing of sacred and secular healing practices. The library responds with careful diplomacy, dispatching physician envoys to demonstrate treatments publicly, cure the sick in marketplaces, and earn trust one community at a time. Warfare, too, is transformed. Armies supported by library-trained medics recover more quickly from wounds, and epidemics that might have decimated campaigns are contained. This has the paradoxical effect of making conflicts more sustainable, an uncomfortable truth that the library's leadership must grapple with. To mitigate this, the library insists that any ruler receiving its advanced medical support must also implement public health measures for civilians, linking military benefit to broader societal welfare. By the dawn of the Common Era in this alternate timeline, Alexandria's influence on medicine is felt far beyond the Mediterranean. The city is home to a central hospital, part infirmary, part research institution, that treats patients from all walks of life while serving as a training ground for new physicians. Graduates of its program carry with them not only technical skill, but a commitment to preserving and expanding the body of medical knowledge. Each is required to submit a written account of cases treated in their home region, ensuring that the library's archives continue to grow with real-world data. In this world, illness is no longer an inscrutable curse from the gods, but a challenge to be understood, managed, and, whenever possible, cured. The Library of Alexandria has transformed healing from a localized craft into a global science, one in which every culture's wisdom is valued, tested, and preserved. The result is a human population more resilient, more interconnected, and more capable of shaping its own destiny, centuries ahead of the path our own history would take. In our own history, the ancient world produced remarkable mechanical wonders, devices that astonished contemporaries yet remained isolated curiosities, their potential unrealized for centuries. The Eolipile of Hero of Alexandria, often described as the first steam engine, was a marvel but never became the driving force of industry. Water wheels ground grain, but no systematic engineering revolution followed. In the alternate reality where the Library of Alexandria survives, this latent genius does not fade into obscurity. Instead, preserved and shared across cultures. These early engines ignite an industrial transformation long before our Middle Ages. The foundation for this technological leap is the library's unparalleled commitment to gathering not only theoretical treatises, but working models of machines. From Greece arrived the designs of Archimedes, compound pulleys, screw pumps, and war engines whose principles are stripped of military exclusivity and applied to civilian life. From China come drawings and prototypes of mechanical clocks, water-powered trip hammers, and wheelbarrows. Indian engineers contribute spinning wheels and intricate irrigation systems, while Babylonian records reveal early principles of gear ratios and mechanical advantage. Egyptian artisans bring their mastery of large-scale stone lifting and precision cutting. Unlike in our history, where these technologies often remain bound to their place of origin, the library's translation and replication program ensures that knowledge travels freely. Skilled mechanics are brought to Alexandria to reconstruct their machines in the library's Hall of Mechanica, a cavernous workshop where inventors from different lands observe, experiment, and improve upon each other's designs. The hall hums with the grinding of gears, the splash of water wheels turning, and the hiss of steam from copper vessels heated for demonstration. Here, the Eolipile is not a temple toy, but the subject of rigorous testing. How to harness its rotation to turn millstones, pump water, or power looms. This culture of applied experimentation accelerates the timeline of mechanical innovation by centuries. By the 2nd century BCE, in this alternate timeline, steam-driven pumps are installed in Egyptian mines, reducing the backbreaking labor of lifting water from deep shafts. Water mills, adapted from Hellenistic and Chinese designs, are standardized and installed along riverbanks from the Nile to the Indus, grinding grain, sawing wood, and even operating simple textile machines. These mills free human and animal labor for other productive work, increasing efficiency and output in ways that ripple through society. Naval engineering benefits immensely from this mechanical synthesis. Drawing on Phoenician shipbuilding, Chinese sternpost rudders, and Greek trireme design, shipwrights develop larger, faster, and more maneuverable vessels. Steam-assisted paddle systems, primitive but functional, are tested for river transport, allowing goods to move upstream without reliance on wind or rowers. The library ensures that each innovation is documented, refined, and disseminated, creating a continuous chain of improvement rather than the fits and starts of our own technological history. The effect on agriculture is transformative. Leveraging Indian and Mesopotamian irrigation knowledge, combined with mechanical pumps powered by water wheels or wind, farmers can bring arid land under cultivation with unprecedented efficiency. Mechanical seed drills, adapted from Chinese designs, increase yields by planting evenly and at optimal depths. Harvesting tools become more sophisticated, integrating interchangeable metal parts, an idea borrowed from Indian and Hellenistic metalworking that can be replaced or repaired without discarding the entire implement. Urban life changes as well. Mechanical lifts, derived from Roman crane designs and improved with counterweights and pulley systems refined in Alexandria, allow multi-story construction to flourish. Fountains and public baths benefit from pressurized water systems, improving sanitation and public health. In Alexandria itself, street lighting is experimented with, initially using mirrored reflectors to amplify torchlight and later exploring oil-fed mechanisms that can operate unattended for hours. The library's role in all this is not merely as an archive, but as an incubator. It funds apprenticeships for talented artisans from across the known world, pairing them with scholars who can translate theoretical principles into practical applications. A Greek mathematician might work alongside an Egyptian bronze caster to create more efficient gear teeth. A Chinese clockmaker might adapt Indian astronomical instruments to regulate mechanical calendars. This interdisciplinary collaboration becomes the hallmark of Alexandrian engineering. The economic implications are vast. Regions connected to the library's network experience a surge in productivity and trade. Goods once considered luxury items, finely woven textiles, precision-cut stone, milled grain, become more widely available as machines reduce labor costs. This, in turn, fuels demand for more machines, creating an early manufacturing economy. Artisans become engineers. Workshops evolve into proto-factories. A class of mechanical specialists emerges, trained in both the operation and repair of complex devices. Yet the rise of ancient engines is not without resistance. Some traditional labor guilds fear displacement by machines and petition rulers to limit their use. Philosophers debate whether reliance on mechanical power will weaken human skill and spirit. Religious authorities in certain regions question whether such manipulation of natural forces trespasses into divine domains. The library responds by emphasizing the Engine's role in reducing human suffering, lifting water from mines, easing agricultural toil, and enabling construction of public works. Military applications are inevitable. Torsion-powered artillery becomes more accurate and mobile. Siege engines incorporate geared winches for faster reloading. Naval warfare adapts steam assist for maneuvers in calm seas. The library, aware of the dangers, tries to balance dissemination with diplomacy, urging rulers to adopt mechanical innovations for civil benefit as a condition for receiving the most advanced designs. While not always successful, this policy slows the pace at which destructive uses overtake constructive ones. By the early Common Era in this alternate history, the ancient world stands on the threshold of an industrial age. Workshops in Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage, and Chang'an produce standardized machine parts that can be shipped and assembled elsewhere. Steam power, still limited in scope but steadily improving, begins to replace animal and human labor in high-demand industries. The library's Hall of Mechanica issues annual catalogs of available designs, distributed via its network of repositories, a kind of proto-industrial marketplace where innovation is constant and cumulative. The enduring presence of the library ensures that no invention is lost to time, no breakthrough left languishing in obscurity. Each device, whether born in the mind of a Greek philosopher, an Indian craftsman, or a Chinese engineer, is preserved, improved, and shared. The engines of the ancient world, in this reality, do not wait for the Renaissance or the Industrial Revolution. They turn, grind, pump, and lift centuries ahead of schedule, reshaping the very rhythm of human life and labor. In the real history we inherited, the known world of the ancients was bounded by rumor and half-charted seas. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules lay the fabled waters where ships might fall into nothingness. Beyond the Indian Ocean stretched an expanse that even the boldest sailors could not map. In the alternate reality shaped by a Library of Alexandria that never falls, those boundaries dissolve centuries early, replaced by the confident lines of maps that span oceans, continents, and the sky above. From its inception, the library recognizes geography not merely as a catalog of place names, but as a strategic science. The Ptolemies gather Greek cartographic traditions, like those of Eratosthenes and Hipparchus, and pair them with Egyptian land surveying techniques developed over millennia of Nile flood management. Indian sailors bring knowledge of monsoon cycles, Chinese navigators contribute compass innovations, and Phoenician mariners share intimate details of Atlantic coastlines. Rather than existing as fragmented wisdom, these contributions are synthesized in Alexandria's Map Hall, a grand, circular chamber lined with painted panels depicting the known world, updated each year as explorers send back new data. The library's translation teams work tirelessly to reconcile conflicting measurements. Greek concepts of latitude and longitude are overlaid with Chinese cardinal orientation systems and Indian astronomical observations. Babylonian mathematical tables are used to refine distance calculations, while Arab and East African star charts help correct navigational errors. This systematic approach produces maps that are astonishingly accurate for their era. Coastal outlines that match the reality within a margin of a few miles. Inland features positioned with reference to river systems and mountain ranges confirmed by cross-continental reports. The tools of navigation evolve alongside the maps. In our history, the magnetic compass appears in Chinese records around the 2nd century BCE, but does not revolutionize navigation until much later. In this alternate world, the library disseminates compass-making techniques across the Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, and beyond within decades of acquiring them. Combined with Greek astrolabes and Indian celestial globes, Mariners can now determine position with remarkable precision even when out of sight of land. Alexandria itself becomes a hub for the production of standardized navigational instruments, stamped with the library's emblem to guarantee accuracy. With such tools in hand, voyages that were once perilous gambles become calculated enterprises. Phoenician-descended sailors from Carthage reach the Canary Islands with ease, while Egyptian-backed expeditions skirt the coast of West Africa, recording harbors, river mouths, and trade opportunities. To the east, fleets launched from Indian ports crossed to Southeast Asia regularly, guided by monsoon timing tables stored and updated in Alexandria. Chinese treasure ships sail westward not as rare diplomatic missions, but as part of an established trade loop that circles the Old World. By the 1st century BCE, in this alternate timeline, whispers begin of expeditions that have crossed the Atlantic, not drifting aimlessly but following compiled charts of currents, bird migration patterns, and seasonal winds derived from centuries of scattered reports. Such voyages are expensive and dangerous, but they no longer depend solely on luck. The library's cartographers mark these lands with tentative outlines and annotations. Forests without end, rivers wide as seas, people skilled in maize cultivation. While the full exploitation of these routes remains centuries away, the psychological barrier of the ocean is broken. These advances have profound economic consequences. The Mediterranean ceases to be the sole center of long-distance maritime trade. Instead, a true intercontinental network emerges. Tin from Britain, silk from China, spices from the Moluccas, gold from West Africa, and maize from the Americas enter a complex web of exchange. The library functions as both the archive and clearinghouse for this flow of geographic intelligence, ensuring that knowledge of safe harbors, prevailing winds, and hazards is never lost to the secrecy of individual merchants. Not all rulers are pleased. Some see the democratization of navigational knowledge as a threat to their control over trade monopolies. In response, they attempt to restrict access to certain maps, commissioning private charts for their fleets. The library, committed to its principle of universal preservation, quietly makes copies of these restricted maps, ensuring they are available to future generations even if temporarily withheld from public display. Over time, this policy becomes an unspoken pact. The library will safeguard knowledge, even if it must occasionally defer its release. The cultural impact is no less transformative. As maps expand, so too does the mental horizon of the ancient world's people. Artists incorporate motifs from distant lands. Philosophers ponder the implications of a connected globe. Religious thinkers grapple with the existence of peoples and landscapes absent from their sacred texts. The idea of barbarian begins to erode, not because prejudice vanishes, but because contact breeds familiarity, and familiarity complicates simplistic categories. The science of geography becomes a discipline in its own right, distinct from cartography. Scholars in Alexandria study not just the shape of the world, but its climates, ecosystems, and resources. They map wind belts and ocean currents, identify fertile regions, and record migratory routes of animals and birds. This proto-environmental knowledge informs colonization and trade policies, reducing the ecological catastrophes that often accompanied expansion in our own history. There are, inevitably, missteps. Maps are political tools as much as scientific ones, and the temptation to exaggerate territorial claims or understate the resources of a rival region is ever present. Some expeditions disappear without trace, victims of storms, disease, or hostile encounters, and their absence is a sobering reminder that the world remains dangerous despite the advances of knowledge. The library responds by creating a system of voyage licensing, requiring crews to be trained in both navigation and diplomacy before embarking on sanctioned explorations. By the dawn of the Common Era in this alternate history, the idea of a whole Earth is no longer a philosophical speculation. It is a cartographic reality, an ever-expanding mosaic of coastlines, rivers, and mountains linked by lines of travel and trade. While much of the Americas, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Oceania remain only partially mapped, the sense of inevitability is palpable. The world is finite, knowable, and increasingly interconnected. The Library of Alexandria, in preserving and systematizing geographic knowledge has accelerated humanity's encounter with itself. Civilizations separated by oceans now stand at the threshold of regular contact centuries before the voyages of Columbus or Zheng He in our own world. The seas, once barriers, have become thoroughfares. The maps of the whole Earth lie unfurled on the tables of scholars and merchants alike, each line a promise of journeys yet to come. In the world we know, literacy was for centuries the guarded privilege of a small elite, and the printing press did not transform society until the 15th century CE. But in the reality shaped by a Library of Alexandria that never succumbed to flame, the written word is not a treasure hoarded in palaces and temples. It is a current flowing through the veins of society, quickened by an invention born far ahead of its time. From its earliest days, the library understood that knowledge hoarded was knowledge wasted. Scrolls and codices were copied tirelessly in its scriptorium, a wing where rows of scribes bent over work tables, their styluses and brushes tracing out words in Egyptian hieratic, Greek, Sanskrit, Chinese, and dozens of other scripts. But copying by hand, even with 100 scribes, could never keep pace with the flood of information pouring in from across the library's global network. The challenge was clear: to preserve and disseminate wisdom on a scale that matched the speed of discovery, a new technology was needed. The breakthrough came from a convergence of traditions. From China, the art of block printing on silk and paper had been known in rudimentary form since the Han Dynasty. From the Hellenistic engineers came precision metal casting techniques used for coinage. Indian metallurgists contributed expertise in durable alloys, while Egyptian papermakers perfected a method for producing smooth, long-lasting sheets of papyrus and parchment. In Alexandria, these threads were woven together into the first true movable type printing system, centuries before Gutenberg would reinvent it in our own world. The innovation was not the work of a single genius, but the outcome of the library's deliberate policy of collaboration. Scholars studying Chinese woodblock prints experimented with carving letters into small metal pieces instead of large plates. These movable types were arranged in frames and inked with a mixture derived from Egyptian lampblack and animal glue, then pressed onto sheets with the aid of a screw mechanism adapted from wine and olive presses. The result was nothing short of revolutionary. A page of text could be set, printed, and reset for another work in a fraction of the time it took to copy by hand. The library's leadership quickly grasped the implications. Printing workshops were established not only in Alexandria, but in satellite repositories across the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Near East. Scribes did not disappear. Indeed, they became proofreaders, editors, and designers of page layouts. But the scale of output multiplied exponentially. Religious texts, philosophical treatises, navigational charts, agricultural manuals, and medical compendiums rolled off presses by the thousands. Where once a text might have existed in only a handful of copies, now it could be found in hundreds of hands within a year. This sudden abundance of reading material demanded a parallel expansion in literacy. The library launched public education programs, establishing schools in every major city within its sphere of influence. Teachers, trained in standardized curricula, taught reading and writing in multiple scripts, ensuring that no single language monopolized access to learning. Literacy ceased to be a rare skill and became an expected competency, particularly in urban centers where commerce, governance, and science thrived on written records. The social effects were profound. Merchants used printed ledgers and catalogs to manage trade networks stretching across continents. Farmers read illustrated guides on crop rotation, irrigation techniques, and pest control, improving yields and reducing famine. Physicians carried portable printed manuals summarizing treatments from Egypt, India, and Greece, enabling them to cross-check diagnoses and experiment with more effective remedies. Even artisans, carpenters, potters, weavers, benefited from pattern books and design guides that allowed them to replicate and improve upon styles from distant lands. Religious and philosophical discourse was transformed. In our own history, the scarcity of manuscripts concentrated theological interpretation in the hands of a clerical elite. Here, printed copies of sacred texts proliferated, enabling individuals to read and reflect for themselves. This did not eliminate religious authority, but it did diversify it, as local interpretations flourished alongside central doctrines. Debates that might once have been confined to a single school or monastery now rippled across regions, carried by pamphlets and essays exchanged through the library's courier system. The political consequences were equally significant. Rulers who embraced mass literacy gained administrative efficiency unmatched in our own antiquity. Edicts could be printed and distributed across an empire in days rather than months, reducing the lag between command and compliance. Laws could be codified and standardized, reducing corruption by limiting the interpretive power of local officials. However, this transparency also made rulers more accountable. Subjects armed with printed laws could recognize when their rights were being violated, and in some cases, they organized resistance accordingly. Not all welcomed the change. In certain courts, advisors warned that an informed populace might challenge traditional hierarchies. Attempts were made to restrict access to certain texts, particularly those containing military strategies, political theory, or dissenting religious ideas. The library resisted such censorship, but where suppression could not be avoided, it quietly archived the targeted works for eventual release. Its archivists believed that known knowledge should be lost to fear, only delayed until the world was ready to receive it. The expansion of printing also reshaped the sciences. Where in our history the work of great thinkers often languished in obscurity, here the observations of astronomers, the calculations of mathematicians, and the experiments of engineers could be rapidly disseminated, critiqued, and improved upon. Knowledge became cumulative in a way impossible in a manuscript-based culture. Errors were corrected within months, and promising hypotheses found collaborators across continents. By the dawn of the first millennium CE in this alternate reality, the printed page was as familiar in Alexandria, Carthage, and Chang'an as the amphora or the loom. The written word was no longer the voice of a narrow elite, but the shared language of a civilization whose members could read, write, and debate across vast distances. The pen and the press had fused, not as symbols of authority alone, but as tools of participation, binding together the far-flung peoples of the ancient world in a conversation that would never again be silenced by fire or time. In the world of our history, ancient medicine advanced in remarkable but uneven bursts. Egyptian embalming preserved anatomical knowledge that was never fully shared. Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen created lasting frameworks, but often lacked empirical testing. And Indian and Chinese healers developed sophisticated herbal pharmacopoeias that took centuries to reach the West. But in the timeline where the Library of Alexandria never fell, these streams of healing tradition do not trickle toward each other across millennia. They merge early, becoming a roaring river of medical discovery centuries ahead of its time. The library's curators, guided by the conviction that the health of a people was the foundation of a strong civilization, devoted entire wings to the collection, preservation, and synthesis of medical knowledge. Here, papyrus scrolls from Egypt detailed the setting of bones, the treatment of wounds, and the use of honey as an antiseptic. From Greece came the theories of humors and clinical observation, along with case histories that captured the subtleties of disease progression. Indian traders brought the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, texts rich with descriptions of surgical instruments, cataract removal, and plant-based remedies. Chinese envoys contributed the Huangdi Neijing, explaining the principles of yin-yang balance, acupuncture, and pulse diagnosis. Even the healers of sub-Saharan Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Americas, contacted through the library's expanding network of exploration, added their herbal and ritual traditions to the ever-growing compendium. What made the library's medical project revolutionary was not simply the collection of these texts, but their active integration. Teams of translators, physicians, and natural philosophers worked side by side to reconcile different systems of thought. Where one culture spoke of humors and another of elemental energies, they looked for correspondences. Could yellow bile and heat imbalance be describing the same inflammatory process? They cataloged herbs by their effects, noting that willow bark, used in multiple traditions, reduced fever and pain regardless of the theoretical framework. Slowly, a common medical vocabulary began to emerge, grounded not in ideology, but in empirical observation. The library also institutionalized medical training in a way no ancient society in our reality managed. Schools of medicine, sponsored by both the library and sympathetic rulers, sprouted in Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage, and beyond. Admission was not restricted to the wealthy. Promising students from rural villages could receive scholarships, their expenses covered by city guilds or merchant patrons eager to improve public health. Training combined theory with extensive practice. Anatomy lessons conducted on cadavers obtained through legal and religious negotiation. Apprenticeships in hospitals where students observed and assisted in surgeries. Field rotations in rural areas to learn local remedies and community health management. One of the most transformative effects of this global medical synthesis was the acceleration of surgery. In our history, surgical techniques were often limited by the lack of antiseptics, anesthesia, and anatomical knowledge. In this alternate reality, Egyptian embalming practices, meticulous dissections that revealed musculature and organ placement, were combined with Indian surgical precision and Chinese herbal sedation methods. The result was a repertoire of procedures that could be performed with dramatically reduced mortality rates, hernia repairs, bladder stone removals, even rudimentary tumor excisions. Public health also advanced centuries ahead of its time. With the library as the nerve center, urban sanitation systems spread far beyond Rome's aqueducts and sewers. Alexandria itself became a model city, with covered drains, regulated waste disposal, and public bathhouses designed not just for hygiene, but for disease prevention. Printed public health notices advised citizens on clean water storage, hand washing, and food safety. Quarantine measures, learned from Indian and Chinese practices of isolating the sick during epidemics, were codified into law, dramatically reducing the spread of contagious diseases in densely populated areas. The impact on childbirth was equally profound. Midwifery, long a female-dominated profession passed down orally, was recorded, standardized, and taught systematically. Herbal pain relief, birthing positions optimized for safety, and postnatal care regimens reduced maternal and infant mortality. Knowledge of obstetric complications, such as breech presentations and hemorrhage, was shared openly among practitioners, ensuring that life-saving interventions were not limited to one city or culture. Even mental health found a place within the library's medical wing. Egyptian spiritual healing, Greek philosophical counseling, Indian meditation, and Chinese qi-regulating exercises were studied as legitimate therapies. Physicians began to differentiate between illnesses of the body and disturbances of the mind, leading to gentler treatments for conditions that in our world were often met with superstition and confinement. This synthesis of knowledge also transformed the response to epidemics. In our history, plague struck ancient cities with devastating force, their causes misunderstood and treatments ineffective. Here, physicians armed with an interconnected web of theories and remedies approached outbreaks with a combination of quarantine, sanitation, and targeted herbal or mineral compounds. While they could not prevent all deaths, they reduced the toll and often identified patterns that led to long-term prevention strategies. Yet, as with all powerful knowledge, medicine in this alternate history carried risks. The ability to heal could be twisted into the ability to harm. Some rulers sought to control medical training, restricting certain treatments to elite circles or using knowledge of toxins for political assassination. The library resisted such corruption where it could, embedding ethical training into every medical curriculum and keeping a watchful eye on the dissemination of dangerous substances. By the 1st century CE, in this timeline, a person traveling from the ports of Iberia to the markets of the Indus could expect to find physicians working from the same core medical texts, equipped with standardized instruments, and trained in comparable diagnostic methods. While inequality in access to care still existed, the overall baseline of human health was dramatically higher than in our own world's antiquity. Lifespans lengthened, not because death was conquered, but because disease and injury were met with a coordinated, informed, and compassionate response. The medicine of many lands did more than save lives. It reshaped the way humanity thought about the body, the mind, and the obligations of society to its people. It was proof that when knowledge crossed borders, so too could hope. And in the halls of the Library of Alexandria, where scrolls of every tradition lay side by side. The greatest healing was not only of individuals, but of the divisions that had once kept civilizations apart. In our history, the ancient world flirted with mechanical genius, but rarely embraced it beyond novelty or isolated applications. The Eolipile of Hero of Alexandria spun on a cushion of steam 2 millennia before the Industrial Revolution, yet it remained a curiosity. Archimedes' war machines, Ctesibius water clocks, Indian water-lifting devices, and Chinese gear-driven astronomical instruments all hinted at possibilities that would not fully bloom for centuries. But in the timeline shaped by a Library of Alexandria that endured, these scattered sparks found each other early, igniting an age of invention that reshaped economies, warfare, and daily life centuries ahead of schedule. The key was not merely preserving devices, but preserving the complete body of knowledge that made them possible: mathematics, metallurgy, hydraulics, and precise manufacturing methods, then uniting them in the same place. The library became a workshop as much as an archive, its lower courtyards echoing with the ring of hammers on bronze and the hiss of steam through pipes. Greek engineers debated with Chinese artisans about the best tooth shapes for gears. Egyptian builders compared notes with Indian architects on pulley systems and load distribution. Phoenician shipwrights consulted Babylonian astronomers to align navigational mechanisms with the movement of the heavens. Steam power was the first breakthrough to move beyond theory. In our world, Hero's Eolipile was a marvel without a purpose. Here, it became the starting point for practical experimentation. Library engineers refined the device, designing sealed boilers of bronze and steel alloyed using Indian crucible techniques. They coupled rotating steam turbines to gear systems that could power grain mills, pottery wheels, and textile looms. While the engines remained small compared to those of our 18th century industrial age, they multiplied the productivity of workshops and freed labor for more complex tasks. Hydraulic engineering advanced just as rapidly. Archimedes' screw, already known in Egypt, was scaled up and modified for irrigation projects on a massive scale. Combined with Chinese piston pumps and Indian chain pumps, water could be lifted efficiently from rivers and reservoirs to farmlands miles away, transforming arid regions into fertile fields. Cities integrated pressurized water systems for fountains, baths, and firefighting. Features once reserved for imperial capitals now appeared in provincial towns. Clockwork mechanisms also leapt forward. The Antikythera mechanism, in our history a solitary wonder lost to the sea, was here reproduced and refined into a family of devices: portable navigational calculators, astronomical auroras, and even mechanical calendars used in farming. Librarian inventors collaborated with artisans to make these mechanisms accessible, ensuring that they were not locked away as royal curiosities, but sold to ship captains, farmers, and temple astronomers. Transportation benefited immensely from this technological flowering. Carts and wagons were fitted with ball bearings inspired by Chinese designs, reducing friction and increasing load capacity. Road construction techniques borrowed from Roman engineering were enhanced with modular stone-cutting methods from Persia, producing smoother, more durable highways that linked distant regions. Maritime innovation surged as well. Phoenician ship hulls were strengthened with laminated timber techniques from Southeast Asia, and sails were redesigned for better wind capture based on Egyptian riverine models combined with Indian monsoon knowledge. Military applications were inevitable, though the library tried to steer its inventors toward defensive or civilian uses. Torsion catapults became more compact and mobile, capable of rapid deployment in the field. Fortification design incorporated knowledge of earthquake-resistant architecture from the Indus Valley, making city walls both stronger and more flexible. Steam-assisted siege devices, rolling battering platforms driven by low-pressure engines, appeared briefly in conflicts, though they were controversial even among generals. The economic impact of these engines was transformative. Workshops no longer relied solely on the strength of human or animal muscle. Small-scale mechanical power allowed artisans to produce more goods in less time. Textile production, in particular, exploded, with powered looms weaving complex patterns inspired by both Eastern and Western traditions. The surplus in manufactured goods fueled long-distance trade, creating wealth that funded further innovation. daily life also began to change. In cities connected to the library's technological network, public mills ground grain for entire neighborhoods, freeing households from the labor of hand grinding. Mechanical lifts, adapted from water-raising devices, were installed in multi-story warehouses and some ambitious private homes. Public fountains and baths ran continuously, their water pressure maintained by hydraulic pumps. Even entertainment benefited. Amphitheaters featured rotating stage platforms and automated scenery changes, astounding audiences with spectacles that blended art and engineering. Yet the spread of machinery brought its own tensions. In some regions, traditional laborers feared displacement, and guilds resisted the introduction of powered devices. The library sought to mitigate this by framing engines as supplements rather than replacements, tools that freed time for more skilled craftsmanship, education, and civic duties. But the seeds of labor unrest were sown, hinting that even in an age of abundance, the human response to change remained complex. One of the library's greatest triumphs was its commitment to open design. Rather than guarding the blueprints of engines as state secrets, it printed them in manuals with clear diagrams, distributed to craftsmen's guilds and municipal councils. This democratization of technology meant that mechanical knowledge did not stagnate in any one place. It evolved in the hands of thousands of builders, each adding local improvements. By the dawn of the first millennium CE, this alternate world hummed with the sound of engines, small, ingenious, and woven into the fabric of society. They did not create an industrial revolution as in our own 18th century, but they laid a foundation far more robust and widespread. The ancient world had entered a mechanical age not of smoke-belching factories, but of elegant, efficient devices that multiplied human potential without yet overwhelming the natural rhythms of life. And through it all, the Library of Alexandria stood as both architect and archivist of this transformation, ensuring that the engines of the ancient world were not fleeting curiosities but enduring instruments of progress, machines that, once set in motion, would never again be stilled. In the history we know, the great oceanic voyages that linked continents began in earnest during the 15th century, when Portuguese caravels rounded Africa and Spanish galleons crossed the Atlantic. But in the timeline shaped by an unbroken Library of Alexandria, the conditions for global exploration ripened more than 1,000 years earlier. The convergence of advanced navigation, robust shipbuilding, and a hunger for knowledge, not merely for conquest, set humanity's sails toward the horizon centuries before Columbus or Zheng He were born. It began, as so many things did in this world, in the map rooms of the library. Here, the Ptolemaic world maps were not static curiosities but living documents, constantly updated with reports from traders, diplomats, and scholars. Egyptian reed charts showing Nile tributaries were placed beside Polynesian stick charts that mapped the swell patterns of the Pacific. Roman itineraries met with Phoenician coastal pilots' notes, while Indian Ocean currents were annotated alongside Chinese compass readings. Layer upon layer, the world grew less mythical and more precise, until the shorelines of distant lands began to emerge in cartographic clarity. The preservation of navigational science was crucial. In our reality, the magnetic compass would not reach Europe until the medieval period. In this alternate history, Chinese lodestone compasses were recorded and replicated in Alexandria as early as the 3rd century BCE. Combined with improved astrolabes from the Hellenistic world, Polynesian star path navigation, and Indian monsoon wind knowledge, sailors could steer with unprecedented accuracy. The Antikythera-like devices perfected in the library's workshops gave mariners mechanical means to predict lunar phases, eclipses, and tidal cycles, enabling them to plan voyages with both confidence and precision. Shipbuilding evolved in tandem. The hybridization of Mediterranean and oceanic designs produced vessels capable of both speed and endurance. Phoenician hull construction, bent planks sewn or pegged together for flexibility, was fused with Southeast Asian outriggers for stability and Chinese watertight bulkheads for compartmentalized safety. Triangular lateen sails from the Indian Ocean were combined with square-rigged topsails, giving ships the ability to tack effectively against the wind and harness multiple points of sail. These were not delicate triremes meant to hug the coast. They were deep-keeled, ocean-going ships with cargo holds sufficient for months-long journeys. The first wave of long-range expeditions was driven not by imperial greed, but by scholarly sponsorship. The library itself commissioned voyages, not to claim lands, but to collect knowledge, flora, fauna, minerals, languages, and manuscripts. A fleet would leave Alexandria under a contract that bound its captains and crew to deliver their findings first to the library before trading their cargo elsewhere. These early exploratory missions followed the currents down the east coast of Africa, across to India, and eventually toward the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia. From there, more daring captains began to probe the far reaches of the Pacific, learning from Austronesian navigators who had long mastered the ocean's rhythms. Some ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope centuries before the Portuguese, opening a continuous maritime route between the Mediterranean and East Asia. Others ventured west into the Atlantic, guided by reports of islands beyond the Pillars of Hercules and the persistent, if fragmented, Phoenician tales of voyages along the West African coast. It was only a matter of time before transoceanic contact began. Records in this alternate world describe a voyage from Carthage in the 1st century CE that reached a chain of islands in the mid-Atlantic, likely the Azores or Madeira, and returned safely. A century later, a joint Alexandrian-Phoenician expedition, riding the Canary Current, made landfall on the coast of what we now call Brazil. They did not attempt colonization. The journey was too long for sustained settlement, but the exchange of goods and knowledge was real. Cotton and maize samples made their way back to Alexandria, and in return, bronze tools and glass beads found their way into South American trade networks. The ripple effects of such voyages were profound. Botanical knowledge expanded explosively. Cassava, sweet potatoes, and chili peppers were studied alongside Old World staples like barley and rice. Metallurgical techniques were shared between continents. Languages and scripts were recorded, compared, and preserved. Diseases, too, traveled, but the advanced medical understanding fostered by the library's global health network slowed the devastation that such exchanges caused in our own world. Quarantine stations became standard at major ports, and ship logs included mandatory health records of crew and cargo. Economically, this early age of exploration shifted power balances. No single empire could monopolize the sea lanes for long. The library's policy of open dissemination of navigational charts and ship designs prevented the rise of isolated maritime hegemons. Instead, city-states and trading coalitions from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea participated in an interlinked network, exchanging not just goods but innovations in agriculture, metallurgy, and art. Culturally, the voyages broadened the ancient imagination. Tales of distant lands no longer belonged solely to the realm of myth. They were grounded in first-hand accounts, sketches, and even returning emissaries from foreign shores. In the amphitheaters of Alexandria, dramatists staged plays set in real places thousands of miles away. Artisans in Gaul worked jade from East Asia. Architects in the Malay archipelago incorporated Roman arch design into their temples. The human world, once bounded by rumor, became a lived and shared geography. Of course, exploration also brought tensions. Smuggling and piracy flourished along the busiest routes. Some voyages returned laden with captives, sparking fierce debates within the library and among its patrons about the ethics of such practices. There were disputes over resources: pearls from the Indian Ocean, gold from southern Africa, rare woods from distant islands, that occasionally erupted into skirmishes. But even these conflicts unfolded within a framework of shared navigation and mutual recognition of the seas as highways rather than fortresses. By the 4th century CE, in this reality, the map of the known world stretched far beyond the Mediterranean basin. Routes crisscrossed the Indian Ocean, laced the Pacific, and threaded through the Atlantic to the edges of the Americas. The library's archives bulged with charts, specimen collections, and ethnographic notes, an encyclopedia of the Earth's centuries in the making. In this alternate age of exploration, the horizon ceased to be a barrier. It became an invitation. And from these open sea lanes, another transformation loomed, one that would not only connect continents, but ideas. For the same ships that carried spices and silk could also carry philosophies, religions, and political concepts, knitting human thought into a tapestry richer than any the ancient world of our reality ever knew. In the history we know, the Renaissance was the blossoming of Europe after a long slumber, a rebirth sparked by rediscovered classical texts and new connections with the wider world. But in the timeline shaped by an unbroken Library of Alexandria, the world did not wait until the 15th century to awaken. The web of trade routes, exploration, and scholarly exchange that had spread across continents by the 4th century CE became more than a network of goods. It became a living network of minds. Knowledge, philosophy, religion, and science flowed as freely as spices and silks, carried on the same winds and currents that moved ships between continents. The library stood at the center, but it was no longer merely a building in Alexandria. By now, its archives had grown into a federation of mirror libraries in major port cities: Carthage, Antioch, Byzantium, Meroe, Palembang, Guangzhou, and Pataliputra. Each repository was a hybrid of local traditions and the central Alexandrian system, connected by dedicated fleets and secure overland couriers. It was a deliberate redundancy. No single fire, flood, or invasion could erase humanity's memory. This alone changed history's trajectory. Where our world's knowledge was vulnerable, theirs was resilient. The constant influx of ideas reshaped philosophical thought. Greek rationalism met Indian logic. Confucian ethics mingled with Stoic discipline. Egyptian metaphysics found unexpected harmony with Mayan cosmology. Debates once confined to a single culture now unfolded across continents. In Palembang, Buddhist monks discussed Aristotle's metaphysics with Alexandrian envoys. In Alexandria itself, scholars pored over Olmec astronomy alongside Babylonian star catalogs. These were not isolated exchanges, but integrated dialogues, preserved in multiple languages and annotated with cross-cultural commentaries. Religion transformed in this connected world. Rather than the abrupt clashes and suppressions that marked our own history, there was more syncretism, more adaptation. This did not mean the absence of conflict. Belief systems still competed for followers, but the competition often unfolded in intellectual arenas rather than battlefields. Missionaries traveled with caravans and merchant ships, not as conquerors, but as cultural ambassadors. Temples and shrines became centers of learning as well as worship, and theological arguments were preserved in the same catalogs as engineering treatises and agricultural manuals. Science advanced with unprecedented speed because observation was no longer geographically bound. In this alternate timeline, the heliocentric model of the solar system emerged centuries earlier, refined through the collaboration of Indian, Babylonian, Greek, and Mayan astronomers. Mathematical notation began to standardize, blending Greek geometry, Indian numerals, and Chinese algebraic concepts into a proto-universal system of symbols. These advances did not remain trapped in elite circles. The library and its mirrors made simplified versions of key works available to artisans, merchants, and even farmers, integrating scientific understanding into daily life. Medicine, too, benefited from the global exchange. Egyptian surgical tools were improved with Indian metallurgy. Chinese herbal knowledge combined with Mediterranean dietetics. Andean quinine bark was studied alongside African and Middle Eastern remedies for fevers. Public health concepts, sanitation, quarantine, clean water supply, became standard in urban planning, reducing the frequency and severity of epidemics. By the 5th century CE, some cities in this alternate world enjoyed life expectancies that would not be matched in our own history until the 19th century. The arts flourished in ways unimaginable in our own past. Sculpture in marble learned from Polynesian woodcarving techniques. African bronze casting inspired new European and Asian styles. Theater blended narrative structures from Greek tragedy, Sanskrit drama, and pre-Columbian ceremonial performance. The spread of paper-making from China to the Mediterranean happened centuries earlier, and with it came a revolution in literature. Books, not just scrolls, circulated widely, and portable libraries became the prized possessions of merchants and nobles alike. The political consequences were equally significant. A new class of scholar merchants emerged, individuals equally comfortable in the marketplace and in the debating hall, who saw the exchange of ideas as inseparable from the exchange of goods. Diplomatic missions often included scientific advisors and philosophers, who were as important in negotiating treaties as generals or treasurers. States began to recognize that their legitimacy could be strengthened by patronage of knowledge. Rulers competed to host conferences, sponsor expeditions, and endow local archives. This interconnectedness also fostered a kind of early global citizenship. People began to see themselves not only as members of a tribe, city, or empire, but as participants in a broader human enterprise. This was reinforced by shared calendars for navigation and trade, mutual agreements on the weights and measures used in commerce, and a common symbolic language for scientific notation. Although wars still broke out and rivalries endured, the idea that knowledge belonged to humanity as a whole gained moral traction. But there were shadows. With the rapid spread of ideas came ideological confrontations that could destabilize entire regions. Radical interpretations of political theory, some advocating for utopian equality, others for total control, were disseminated just as swiftly as new methods for irrigation or metallurgy. The very openness that allowed for cultural flourishing also created vulnerabilities. Disinformation, religious extremism, and dangerous technologies could move along the same networks as wisdom and truth. The library's leadership responded with protocols for review and responsible dissemination. Controversial works were not censored outright, but accompanied by counter-arguments and context, printed in parallel. It was an early recognition that controlling knowledge was less effective than equipping people to question and interpret it. Yet, even this measured approach could not entirely prevent misuse. There were always those who twisted ideas to serve personal ambition. Still, by the late 5th century CE, in this timeline, the world was unmistakably different from our own. Where our history entered a slow decline after the fall of Rome, there surged forward, propelled by a cultural and intellectual momentum that no single collapse could arrest. Empires rose and fell, but the web of ideas endured, anchored in archives that stretched from the Pillars of Hercules to the shores of the Pacific. This connected world of ideas was more than a sum of its knowledge. It was a living organism, pulsing with curiosity, resilience, and the belief that the human mind, when fed by many rivers of thought, could chart a course far beyond the narrow horizons of the past. The stage was set for a transformation that would outshine even this golden age, one that would point humanity toward the stars themselves. By the 6th century CE, in this alternate history, the Earth had become a tightly woven tapestry of commerce, culture, and science. The Library of Alexandria, no longer a single edifice but a global constellation of archives, had done more than preserve knowledge. It had cultivated an expectation that the human story was one of continual expansion. The sea had been crossed, the continents connected, the sky mapped in intricate detail. Inevitably, the eyes of humankind began to look upward not with mythic longing, but with the deliberate focus of engineers, astronomers, and dreamers who believed the heavens were the next frontier. In our history, astronomy in antiquity was often in service to religion or agriculture, bound to the cycles of planting and ritual. In this timeline, centuries of open collaboration between the world's greatest skywatchers had pushed celestial science into the realm of precision engineering. Babylonian eclipse predictions, Greek geometric models, Indian planetary calculations, Chinese cometary records, and Mayan astronomical cycles had been merged into unified celestial charts that could forecast the positions of planets decades in advance. The heliocentric model, once proposed and dismissed, had become consensus centuries before Copernicus would have written his first notes in our world. This convergence of theory and practical navigation ignited a new ambition: to reach beyond the atmosphere itself. The concept was not born in a single mind, but emerged from the overlapping currents of multiple disciplines: shipwrights accustomed to building watertight hulls, engineers versed in pressure management for deep-sea diving bells, alchemists who had refined volatile compounds for centuries in search of purer fuels. The library's Central Assembly, a kind of proto-international council of science, formally commissioned a project, not merely to study the heavens, but to touch them. The first steps were modest. Tower observatories rose higher and more precise, equipped with refracting lenses centuries ahead of our own timeline. Balloons of silk and varnished linen, filled with heated air or buoyant gases distilled in laboratories, lifted scientists above the weather to gather atmospheric data. These flights, some lasting hours, others days, became both feats of courage and invaluable experiments in human endurance at altitude. Observers recorded the thinning air, the dropping temperatures, the curvature of the Earth. The notion that space was an attainable realm shifted from poetry to possibility. Advances in chemistry proved decisive. The combined knowledge of Chinese gunpowder formulas, Greek fire innovations, and Indian alchemical distillation produced fuels far more potent and controllable than in our own Middle Ages. By the 7th century CE of this alternate history, multistage rockets, descendants of simple military projectiles, were being tested not for war, but for altitude records. Each success brought new data: how materials behaved in the cold, thin upper air, how payloads could be stabilized, how to recover instruments intact. These early space programs were collaborative in a way few human endeavors had ever been. The library's ethos of shared knowledge meant that designs, failures, and breakthroughs were published in multiple languages and distributed to every mirror archive. Egyptian mathematicians worked alongside Polynesian navigators to design trajectory calculations. Artisans from the Malay archipelago contributed heat-resistant resins for nose cones. Metallurgists from the Kushite lands supplied alloys that could withstand explosive forces without fracturing. By the mid-8th century CE, in this world, humanity stood on the brink of its first true spaceflight. The vehicle, known in the library's records as the Etherian, was a towering, three-stage rocket built not by a single nation, but by a coalition of ports and kingdoms spanning 3 continents. Its capsule was a compact, pressure-sealed sphere, lined with layered textiles, metals, and varnishes designed to hold air and protect its lone occupant from the searing heat of re-entry. The pilot would be chosen not for royal status, but for resilience, adaptability, and the capacity to make detailed observations under stress. When the Etherian finally launched from a coastal platform in the Gulf of Suez, it did so under the gaze of envoys from across the known world. The ascent was violent and brief, the roar of its engines shaking the ground for miles. Minutes later, the capsule breached the boundary of space, defined then not by modern kilometers, but by the sudden absence of air and the unfiltered blaze of the sun. The pilot, suspended between the blue curve of the Earth and the black infinity above, scribbled notes that would be read aloud in the library's halls within the week. The return was as perilous as the climb, the capsule plunging through the atmosphere with a tail of fire before splashing into the calm waters of the Red Sea. The pilot emerged alive, bearing not just physical proof of the journey, soot-blackened metal, a charred banner of silk, but the testimony that Earth was indeed a sphere hanging in a vast, unbounded void. The impact of that flight was seismic. No longer was the sky an abstract dome, it was a gateway. The philosophical implications rippled through every culture. Religious traditions reinterpreted their cosmologies to account for a universe far larger than previously imagined. Political powers considered the strategic possibilities of reaching higher altitudes. Scholars debated whether the Moon or Mars could one day be reached, and what resources might be found there. Most importantly, the library's global network had proven something extraordinary: that when humanity pooled its collective knowledge, it could achieve what once seemed divine. The age of terrestrial exploration had seamlessly transformed into the age of celestial exploration. This civilization, centuries ahead of ours, now faced a future in which the stars were no longer fixed points in myth. They were destinations waiting for sails of a different kind. In our reality, the Library of Alexandria exists only in whispers, an unprovable list of what might have been, a ghost ship of knowledge wrecked on the shores of history. We speak of it with the reverence reserved for lost paradises, half believing that if we had only kept its scrolls, we would have cured every disease, crossed every ocean, and reached the stars centuries before our time. Yet, as the alternate history you have just journeyed through reveals, the truth is more nuanced. Knowledge alone does not guarantee wisdom, nor does preservation automatically lead to peace. But it does give humanity a chance, a chance to decide its own pace, its own horizon, without the endless need to rediscover what was already known. In the world where the library never fell, the human story is not a straight line of triumph, but it is a fuller arc. Civilizations still rise and fall, politics still shift like sand, human flaws still ripple through every century. But the difference is this: the memory of humanity is never entirely erased. Ideas are not left to rot in forgotten ruins or hidden behind jealous borders. They circulate, adapt, and live on. Generations inherit not just the tools of survival, but the scaffolding of possibility. And so, when they turn their eyes upward, they do so standing on a foundation both ancient and unbroken. For us, the library remains an ache. We know that Archimedes' blueprints for machines far beyond his time may have been lost in its flames. We know that histories of peoples whose names we may never learn could have been written there. We know that maps, medicines, philosophies, and languages could have spared us centuries of darkness and bloodshed. But our world is not without hope. The dream of Alexandria, that the collected wisdom of humanity can be gathered, preserved, and shared, did not die entirely. It lives in the shelves of our libraries, the servers of our digital archives, the open-source repositories that span continents. It lives in the quiet insistence of teachers, archivists, and scientists that knowledge must be for all, not hoarded by the few. If the fire that never came teaches us anything, it is that the preservation of knowledge is not a single act, but a constant responsibility. It is a lighthouse that must be tended, a flame that must be fed. We cannot undo the loss of Alexandria, but we can build its successor, not of papyrus and marble, but of silicon, fiber optic cable, and human will. We can choose to make our era the one in which no idea is lost for want of preservation, no cure buried in a forgotten notebook, no truth silenced by distance or decay. And perhaps that is the final gift of imagining the library whole, not the fantasy of a perfect world, but the challenge to make our own world less imperfect. To remember that the destruction of knowledge is as great a tragedy as the destruction of lives, for in many ways, the two are inseparable. And to understand that every book kept safe, every discovery shared, every voice recorded and passed on, is a brick in a bridge to a future we can still reach. The fire that consumed the Library of Alexandria in our timeline is long extinguished. But in this telling, the fire that never came still burns, not as destruction, but as light. And in that light, the world we might have known is not lost entirely. It flickers in our imagination, waiting for us to make it real.